Good afternoon, everybody. We're happy that you joined us today. My name is Abrena Ganaden. I am the Continuum of Care Program Manager for the Coalition. We're going to be talking about elevating lived experience and focusing our conversation around experiences, challenges, and strategies for embedding people with lived experience into programs and policy. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to our panel today.
Hi everyone, Jocelyn Curran. I'm the Senior Director for the Bay Area and Central Coast with Downtown Streets team. We've been operating in Salinas for the past 5.5 years, and we work with folks that are experiencing homelessness by providing a workforce development program, as well as we have a rapid rehousing program.
I'm Jesse Shaw. I work with Interim Incorporated, and we've been around for 50 years now, so 50th year in Monterey County. I work as a wellness navigator and peer advocacy coordinator, and we provide housing services and behavioral health services for people in Monterey County with mental illness or substance use or combination.
Thanks, Jesse. My name is Julius Mills-Denti. I am the Director of Central California Programs for Step Up on 2nd. And we've been in Monterey now for 4.5 years, and we have programs in Salinas and King City and Soledad as well. So countywide stuff. Ran a supportive housing program for a while, and now we do a lot of scattered site work. We run a motel in King City, have an encampment resolution project in Soledad, and sort of a widespread case management / housing navigation operation going around town here. So glad to be here to talk about good work. Tim is up.
Tim Heavin, good to see a lot of familiar faces here. First of all, I have lived experience with being homeless or unhoused, as people say. I currently work as a community health worker for St. Vincent and Preventive Family Care. I also am very involved in the fight to end homelessness with other organizations I collaborate and work with and consult with. I'm on the COC Leadership Council Governance Committee. I'm the co-chair of the Monterey Evaluations Committee. I created and I chair the Lived Experience Advisory Directive, the LEAD, which is a 15-member board of people with experienced homelessness. Also, I advocate and I work closely with the Corporation for Supportive Housing on the California State Policy Advisory Committee. And also, there's one more, I'm on the Community Action Board in San Benito County as well. I'm a community health worker, though. That's a big part of engaging the lived experience part of the work I do. Is being a community health worker, that's what they kind of look for, is people with that lived experience to be, I kind of helped spearhead actually this whole CalAIM expansion with the other work I do. And so yeah, that's how kind of we engage the peer supports and the utilization.
Thank you, Tim. All the committees, and yeah, I forgot to ask you guys to briefly share about how you've implemented the utilization of people with lived experience in your organizations as part of your introduction. So can you please share that?
Sure. So we call our clients team members, capital T, capital M, proper noun, because we really want to prioritize them, their opinions, their thoughts, their feelings. We provide compensation for their time as they participate in our program, so I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. We also offer part-time employment opportunities for what we call our participant employees. Those are also folks that are experiencing homelessness. And what we do is we provide kind of a pathway through employment. So our team members are folks that are living on the street, haven't had a job for 12 plus weeks. Usually they're chronically homeless. And so we help walk with them through their journey so that they can move from homelessness to full-time employment, and if they're interested, housing as well. And so it's really about honoring their time, providing them with compensation. We also do an annual survey where we are soliciting their thoughts and their opinions about how we're doing, how we're providing services, and what we can do better to make sure that what we're doing is truly meeting their needs.
I'm Jesse, yeah, same. So, just kidding. No, I have a lot more to say. My bosses are over there, so I gotta grab our minds. But no, yeah, with Interim, we really believe in peer advocacy. The program I work for directly is Success Over Stigma, and what it's all about is empowering peers to share their stories and to share their opinions about what works for them. And one of our program aspects is our peer advisory council, and we take one representative, one client, a peer from every interim program. We have so many programs, and we meet every other month and talk about what's going on. And that, I'm the only staff member there. I have lived experience with mental health and substance use, but I don't have lived experience with homelessness. But for that council, I'm the only staff, so we all share share what's going on, and it's a way for basically for clients to talk directly to the county instead of it being a 5-email chain that falls through the cracks. Almost all our programs have CSWs, community support workers, that are all have lived experience, and our wellness navigators all have lived experience either themselves or with a family member. So without that, I mean, that's the biggest thing for me personally. I've received services in Riverside County, where I'm from. Several agencies, I'm not going to mention their names because I have nothing good to say about the agencies I received services from. But coming to interim, that was the biggest thing that I really wanted to work with them, is because it felt like a support team instead of that hierarchy. Whether it's clinicians or psychiatrists or counselors or wellness navigators, it all feels like a support team. And that's all based on the peers, what the peer has to say. And part of our recovery task force and peer advisory council, we follow that peer-led movement, and the slogan is "Nothing about us without us." That's our biggest thing.
Love that. Julius?
Thanks, Jesse. That's a pretty robust effort you got going. Step Up's gone through a pretty interesting transition over the last year, and we've transitioned from being a daily on-site supportive services provider to a scattered site service provider, which is adjusted the way that we are including folks with lived experience into our programs and our hiring. Prior to the transition, we had a weekly tenant advisory committee that would actually meet on site where the tenants lived. And that wasn't designed to just happen for a news publicity stunt, but it was rather an ongoing group that would actually help inform some of the policy, make recommendations to the property managers, and try to drive change based on how the folks who are living there were impacted. And we implement a similar version in King City, albeit to a lesser extent. We also have a workforce development program where we'll hire folks who are currently enrolled in our programs to work on a stipend basis. And I'll save a little bit of the details about how you can actually implement that into your respective programs and use the money to make that happen for a question that's probably coming down the line here. But that's something that we've done too. Offers a direct pathway to employment that is reasonable for folks who haven't been employed for a long time.
Yeah, thank you guys for that. I want to just lift up the work that interim and downtown streets team and Step Up all do. They're probably at they're operating at a very high level as far as peers go. And I think this whole, not too many people know about the whole Caline expansion, but like the community health worker involvement and this peer support thing, which I am a community health worker, is really such a significant factor that can be implemented in a lot of programs.
Thank you. All right, next question is for Jesse and Tim, but you guys feel free to give your input. Why is it essential to meaningfully integrate people with lived experience into program design, policy development, and service delivery? And what impact have you seen when this is done well?
So, I love that question. We're both super excited on the practice session of that one. For me, I think what I really wanted to say was that without that voice of the people that we're trying to support, a lot of the times when these programs get rolled out, it's about hiding homelessness. It's about sweeping it under a rug. And without that voice, it's not very human. It's easy to humanize people who are homeless or have substance use or mental health illness. So I think without that aspect, it just becomes dehumanizing, and at the same time, it's also still not considering their self-determination, which is a huge part of supporting people, is using their voice. Without that element of people's own experience, we can end up speaking for others, and it's not sustainable. We all know what it feels like to have someone tell us what's best for us. We might agree in the moment because we have to, but it's harder for us to sustain that. And also, found, like an example with that's our peer advisory council, that when we have people that share their own stories, they feel empowered and they want to bring other people to the table who have the same experience. And it's organic and it grows itself, and it's not punitive. Because I think when you don't allow people to speak for themselves about something that concerns them directly, it's the same as telling them you are not competent, you are not a member of the community, and that's the biggest problem we're having. We're trying to not repair. When we don't include them, we're trying to eliminate or quiet. So I think that's the most important part. And when it works, when we do it right, it's, like I said, it's organic and it's self-sustaining, and it's I'm trying to think of the best word, but basically it runs itself, and it allows everyone to be a part of it in ways that really matter.
Thank you for that. I think there's a saying, I don't know if everyone's heard it or not, it's nothing about us without us, right? And it's essential to have meaningful integration of people with lived experience into program designs, policy development, and service delivery, because we carry the type of expertise first that can't be learned from, like textbooks or reading. This is a real lived experience. We could relate. It's hard for anyone to meet someone where they're at if they haven't been there. We could say we're meeting them where they're at, but are we meeting them where they're at, or are we meeting them where we want them to be at? And I found that interesting in the Housing First conversation earlier, and I wish I was here to address that with a lot of folks, is we know firsthand the gaps, the barriers, and the unintended consequences that often get overlooked when programs are designed without the input of people with lived experience. And when we involve individuals with lived experience from the beginning, we create systems that are not only more compassionate, culturally relevant, but also far more effective. Our voices ensure that services are person-centered rather than system-centered, and services that actually meet people where they are instead of where they assume they should be. So there's a different, I always look at it on a policy level, service delivery level, and then this our insight. On the policy level, our insight helps dismantle harmful stereotypes and exposes policy blind spots that professionals without those experience might miss. It also shifts the focus from managing symptoms of addressing root causes and driving real systemic change. And service delivery, having people with lived experience involved fosters trust, breaks down stigma, and creates environments where clients feel seen, heard, and respected. It humanizes the work. It builds authentic relationships, and often leads to better engagement, retention, and outcomes. And so I just want to mention that meaningful integration is crucial. I think there's a lot of tokenism that happens that I've noticed as well. And it's about recognizing that lived expertise is a professional expertise. It's about partnerships, power sharing, and building systems that are designed with the people they serve. Thank you.
Actually, I wanted to add something real quick to that, Tim. Just what you're sharing, really. I think even specifically, not only having people who have lived experience, but have lived experience in that county that they're offering services. Because you learn a lot when you're providing services on how to navigate it, but you learn the most when you've had to navigate it yourself. My program manager, Katrina, she was a client in terms for years before she became the program manager, and I never seen someone deliver services so well, because she's like, oh yeah, you got to go to the. She knows exactly what to do and what needs to be done from that perspective, instead of this kind of bullet point robotic, something you find on a website you can't find with someone who has lived experience in that particular county, even or even the city. And the people we just saw, the last presentation we saw was 81% of people in Monterey County that are homeless are from here. They're not a big stereotype is that people from the Bay are coming out and receiving services. It's not the case. So we need people who are not only have lived experience but have lived experience here.
I also think about it like this. They always say an addict can best serve and help another addict, right? The same thing with anything else in life. The person with that experience could best serve that person with homelessness, anything in life really. That peer support that's been through it obviously is going to be the best to be able to help that person.
I think a lot of what happens when somebody is unsheltered is they're treated in, like Jesse was saying, a dehumanizing way, and there's a loss of dignity that comes with that. And so the bare minimum that we can do as service providers is to treat the people we serve with dignity, and part of that is hearing what they have to say, honoring what they have to say, and taking it seriously, implementing it into our programs, because without that, we could be providing a service that is deeply unuseful, and that's not a good use of time, resources. And so if we really want to serve the population that we're focusing on, we have to hear from them directly about what it is that they need. Because like the panel is saying, without that lived experience, there is no way for somebody to truly understand. We can empathize, we can have an open heart and an open mind, but we can't actually understand what it is to worry about where you're going to use the restroom, where are you going to shower, so that you can show up for whatever your obligations are that day. So from DST's perspective, it's kind of the bare minimum that we can do is to listen to the voice of those with lived experience and make sure that it's deeply embedded in the services we provide.
Good answers, guys. Thank you. All right, this next question, I think we might have touched on this a little, but just to dive a little deeper, Julius and Jocelyn. What are some common challenges organizations face when trying to move from tokenism to true partnership with individuals with lived experience? And how can these challenges be addressed?
All right, that's a big question. And I've thought about it a little bit, and I think Jesse and Tim shared some convincing points that I'll try to capture in my answer here. When we think about tokenism, we think about like a symbolic and perfunctory way of lifting someone from an underrepresented group up and into the limelight, but not building sustainable systems within our programs that will allow those folks to have continued long-term success. So for homeless service providers, this may look like a featured news article with a person who's moved beyond homelessness, and that might be posited as a success story, right? It might be an organization's way of putting stuff on their social media page around the folks who are doing well within their programs. And all of this stuff is important. I don't want to say that it's not, because it acknowledges the good work that we're doing and it affirms our efforts. But at times it can hide the structural obstacles that perpetuate homelessness and cause homelessness and allow folks to not engage in those really important discussions. And I think we run the risk of overdoing it and saturating our success stories with the people we serve and not really looking at what we're doing when we're failing to serve those who are enrolled in our programs. And to take it a step further, I think a couple ways we can address the challenges of tokenism. I think there's some practical things that programs can do right away. One thing that Step Up's done is we've actually built in our job descriptions when we were a supportive housing provider that the tenant advisory committee has to meet weekly. So every service coordinator who came in was responsible for facilitating that group and ensuring that it continues and isn't just a one-time thing when there's disgruntled tenants at your property. You can have your HR, so you can work with your HR teams on making that a condition of a job description. If you are in the supportive housing business, making sure that's built into the job description so your staff, when they come in, your Lyme staff, are prepared to start facilitating those groups and have the professional support to do so. I think you can also hire people on a stipend basis. And you want to look at what's cool about some of the stuff that funds our programs, the HAP and the ERF money, is that it's flexible enough to build in hiring folks with lived experience into your staffing structure. And so what we've done is we'll hire folks who might not be ready for full-time or even part-time work on a stipend basis and build the efficacy for them, build the efficacy with them for a while until they're ready to transition into community-based employment. And we'll put that on a line item in personnel or a separate line item in workforce development and actually submit that to the funder. And I think one more thing, I think Tim talked about genuine relationships. We talk a lot about building relationships, but we often don't talk about how we do that. I think it's really important for service providers to really think about the how they're building relationships with people with lived experience. I was doing a CARS assessment with a client in King City recently, and I tested this out. I asked him, how long has he experienced homelessness? And he hated the fact that I used the word experience in my question. He said, I haven't experienced homelessness, I am homeless. And then maybe never want to say people have experienced homelessness again, even though it's a small sample size. And his statement was, it was less about learned helplessness. It wasn't that his homelessness was an identity stamp, but it was more of a statement of resistance when he was sitting across from a social worker who was pushing paperwork. And so I want to say to everybody in this room that what you say really matters, and the language of resistance should influence how you're operating with the people that you serve. So the most difficult and the resistant clients should not be the clients who are discharged from your programs for non-compliance. They should be the clients who test you to adjust your approach. And I think the same is true for the language of change. When you hear change, and when you talk with people about how they've overcome their homelessness or moved beyond it, you want to capture those moments and then try to create systems around them. And I know that's a big general statement, but it's worth paying attention to.
Part of the challenge that we are struggling with is that funders are motivated by those success stories. And so as nonprofits that are looking for that funding so that we can serve more individuals, we need to kind of pander to that demographic. And so there is a place for these kinds of stories. But what we try to do at DST is we have weekly success meetings. And so at those meetings, what we're doing is we're celebrating every kind of success. If somebody smokes one less cigarette that day, that's something that's worth celebrating. If they have gone to the dentist and they've been avoiding it for years and years, that is a success that we want to celebrate. Success looks different for everybody, and so while for certain audiences it does have a box that it fits in, we want to make sure that every individual we serve is recognized for the effort that they're putting in, whatever that effort might look like. I think we also, we ask everyone to show up and give their 100%, recognizing that everybody's 100% looks different. And so that also feeds into why success looks different for everybody, because maybe just showing up that day is a success for somebody, and that in and of itself is worth celebrating. And so what we try to do also to address this, kind of highlighting certain voices or those that are louder or potentially more well-spoken or their story is more compelling. What we really want to do is we, as I mentioned before, we have this annual survey. And so what we're doing is we're asking folks, have you been to the hospital less since engaging with Downtown Streets team? Have you been having more positive interactions with law enforcement since engaging with DST? How do you feel seen and heard by your case manager? Do you feel respected by the program manager? And so we're making sure that at least on an annual basis we have this touch point with all of our folks so that we make sure they do feel valued, that they do feel that their voice is heard, and that we want to implement what it is that they have to say. And on a more kind of monetary basis, we have our stipends, and those come in the form of gift cards, and that is for folks that are participating in our weekly workshops and our weekly success meetings. So it's part of that compensating folks for spending 2 hours of their week with us, learning employment-related skills, working on those soft skills and hard skills that are necessary for employment. So sometimes it is, there's arts and crafts, and it's about vision boarding and really kind of thinking about what their future might look like when they haven't done that yet. Or it's something about as tangible as resume building. Let's sit down, let's work out what you can add to your resume so that when you go to a job fair, you have something to hand to folks. And so when we're providing them with those stipends, the point is to help them meet their basic needs so that they can transition from survival mode to goal setting mode. Because if you're worried about where your meal is going to come from, or where you're going to use the restroom, or how you're going to get your toothbrush and your toothpaste paid for, you can't think about what you need to think about in order to secure employment. And so we want to make sure that our gift cards are useful. And so we're taking polls on a consistent quarterly basis saying, okay, are these still the gift cards that you want to receive? Are these the denominations that are most helpful to you? And so we're just making sure that we're having those consistent checkpoints with folks so that we can ensure that our services are meeting the needs as much as possible.
Thanks, guys. All right, next question is for Tim and Julius. Can you share examples of advisory boards, leadership roles, or co-design programs where people with lived experience played a central and effective role, and what made these efforts successful?
I guess I'll go first. So, yeah, this is a really great question, and I think that we have a lot of improvement that we could make in this area of this question, because I just want to touch on, like, when I was hearing the Housing First conversation earlier, I felt like this is the one thing that Housing First is not just housing, it's wraparound services that come with it. And the best model is having a peer support, social worker and another worker working as a team collaboratively with the client. And so a lot of the issues that I heard discussed could be addressed if there was that team able to work with the client. But if we don't have that team able to work with the client, then that's, we're not going to have that same success. So I just want to mention that I think that's an area where we can improve on. I did, so I created and I chaired the Lived Experience Advisory Directive. And, when I did that, I was on the Leadership Council, and I just felt like my voice wasn't enough. I felt like we needed more people, to be a voice for the voiceless, because a lot of folks out there, they don't have a voice. It's hard for them to advocate for themselves, so I created the lead as a way to do that. It's not just a symbolic board, it has voting power though, and so we review policies before they are finalized and regularly present recommendations to the Leadership Council. Because of our input, we have worked toward changing intake processes to be more trauma-informed care, simplified housing applications, and push for low-barrier housing first navigation set of models that will lead to significantly higher placement rates, people that want to actually get into programs, that there's a lot of folks, as an outreach worker, it is so hard sometimes to get folks to even want to go into a program because of the experience they've had elsewhere. And then when we get them into the program, it's like they're quickly exited for any reason. It's like, wow, that's crazy. As hard as it was for them to get in there, And so having, and then also in the leadership roles. So I've been serving on the Leadership Council for about 5 years now. I created the lead. I started working with ASN doing homeless outreach, and as St. Vincent as a community health worker. The doors haven't closed though. I have stepped into further leadership roles. I co-chair the Monterey Evaluations Committee, and also I'm on the California State Policy Advisory Committee. So I work closely with people like Alex, who was here speaking earlier, and I go to frequent meetings with state officials and leaders to advocate for policy changes. I think this is my personal experience. One of my highlights of my advocacy efforts and leadership roles is several weeks ago in Sacramento, I got to present next to Assemblymember Gibson in Sacramento and introducing a new monumental bill, Assembly Bill 1165, which will create a permanent funding stream for homelessness and housing. And I was watching him go and speak, and he was like, wow, this sounds like Martin Luther King, but I got to speak after him, and it was really just a highlight of how engaging people with lived experience it could progress. I should be an example of the progression that can be made. But I didn't do it alone. I had some great support out there too. So yeah, that's all I have.
I'm wondering how many people in the room knew that Tim was doing all this stuff. Okay, good. I'm asking because it's important, because it sort of leads to what I want to talk about and how I want to answer this question is, and I'm not trying to tell you any more work, we're friends, but I was like, Tim should be having regular community forums where the people in this room and in the other rooms can attend. And that way he can share the work that he and his group are doing and actually share these results on a screen. Because until he just shared them with me, even though some of our clients overlap in the community and we talk about work from time to time, I wasn't aware of all this stuff. And I think that's a structural issue that goes back to the question I answered formerly. So there needs to be more opportunities for this kind of engagement. Step Up, like I said, we've done tenant advisory boards. I think a highlight for us was when I think about including people with lived experience into program design and program facilitation. It also means including members of the community. So we had the fire chief, we had Salinas PD, we had intern staff, we had Salinas outreach team. A couple of years ago, we had a big community circle at our Work Street site with about 40 folks, followed by breakout groups that were led by the members themselves about the pressing issues in the community. And a lot of people attended that. And yes, that was a one-time event, but it shows that people do want to come participate in a community-oriented process that feels fair. And I think the how we participate is very important too. It's one thing to have a tenant advisory group that just talks about policy and expresses all their frustrations about how screwed up everything is. It's another thing to have the people participating in that group really feel connected. So in Soledad a couple weeks ago, this wasn't the best one we've ever done, and it was funny. A staff got bit by one of our clients' dogs, and I felt bad for her. That's a sidebar. But we had a big restorative circle with a ball of yarn, and we passed the ball of yarn around, and the person who passed it asked a question, and then the receiver answered that question. So tell me about a time in your life when you overcame an obstacle, and how did you make that happen? What's one change in your life that you would like to make, and what's getting in your way? And these are universal questions. They don't just sort of categorize the homelessness experience. If you thought about a change that you want to make in your life, like I've been trying to make the same change for 10 years and can't do it, right? And so we're a lot more connected that way. And then at the end, the ball of yarn makes this cool web, and you drop it on the floor, and it's symbolic of how individual differences can sort of be celebrated within the context of a community. So when we think about our advisory boards and our participation, how we're including people, think about the process of inclusion, and if those folks that are sitting there with you actually feel it, or if you're just doing it because it's a perfunctory thing to do that you put on your grant, right? So those are some things that I think you can do when you're operating these tenant advisory committees. Make sure they're consistent, make sure that participation is felt, and people have a voice, and the discussion topics are universal, and they're not, I guess, dichotomous.
I think this was a two-part question too, right? I think, I was just looking at it now, but like the efforts to meaningfully integrate people to the experience were, like the success of that would be like shared power and decision making, right? And actually, it really needs to start with the leadership though. You know, it has to start with the leadership. There has to be leadership buy-in. You know, if the leadership hasn't bought in, nothing's gonna change, nothing's gonna happen. You know, you have to have leadership all across government, organizations. They have to buy in and realize that this is a solution. Like the solution, this lived experience is not just about inclusivity, it's about evidence-based results, you know what I'm saying? Like Housing First is the only evidence-based results, like program that's ever been known. You know, so there's a bunch of other things that we've tried all that over the years. You know, this is the first one that's actually evidence-based proven to work, you know what I'm saying? But it's about having that buy-in that it does work, you know, and it's about having that inclusivity. People with lived experience, you know, compensation and value recognition, you know, support and professional development, you know, like empowering people. You know, we have to empower people. Like Julius was saying, like all we can do, like motivational hearing is a huge part of that too, and just like try to get people to think about questions and stuff they wouldn't normally think about. You know what I mean? Like just sparking that thought for change. You know what I mean? It's really crucial.
I think one thing I'd like to add is that part of making sure that folks are embedded in leadership structures is just trusting that those with lived experience have a voice that is worth being heard, and also that they are inherently capable. What we have found is that the kind of pervasive narrative is that those that are unsheltered are simply not capable of holding down full-time employment for XYZ reason. But we have embedded leadership opportunities within our program. And we have come to see on a day-to-day basis how incredibly capable and supercharged their powers are when it comes to motivating those that are picking up debris on the streets or are having a bad day and they're showing up to a workshop. Those that have that lived experience, when they are put into management roles, they step up, and they step up in a huge, huge way. They care more, they try harder, they are there every single day wanting to show just how capable they are. And so by providing opportunities for folks to step up, they will every single time.
Thank you guys. You guys are giving some really great answers here. Next one is for Jocelyn, and then Julius as well if you want to tap in. Compensation is often a barrier when engaging people with lived experience. What are best practices for fairly compensating for their time and expertise?
Sure, so I've touched on this a little bit. So we have different layers of compensation that we provide, and we have different strategies that we employ to make sure that those methods are successful. So first up is the stipends that I've mentioned, and so that is simply for showing up to our weekly workshop and our weekly success meeting. The main tip to success there is that we are consistent with what we are providing, when we are providing it, and the denominations in which folks can choose their gift cards. We also, choose is the operative word there. We're not just handing out the same thing every single time, assuming that there's a one-size-fits-all solution. We have a variety of gift cards that folks can choose from, and they get to choose every single week. So maybe one week they need gas for their car, great, they can get an ARCO card. Maybe the next week they actually need to get some new shoes, so they want a Walmart card. And so we make sure that by having a whole slew of different gift cards, that folks can really choose whatever best suits them for that week. We also have these part-time positions that we're offering, and we're paying competitive wages, $17 to $19 an hour for folks that are working 20 hours a week. And so our kind of programmatic philosophy is that we are starting with folks that have been out of the workforce for a very, very long time. They're not used to showing up places at a specific time. Teamwork is a new skill that they need to build. Being managed by somebody is a new skill that they need to build, or it's a rusty skill that they need to kind of brush up on. And so by showing up to these weekly workshops and to the weekly success meeting, they're able to build those skills again. And then at those meetings, they are building additional skills, like I mentioned, the resume building, and we do mock interviews and kind of the whole slew of different services that might be necessary so that folks can be successful in an interview setting, but then also successful when they progress to part-time or full-time employment. So they start out as a team member, showing up to these weekly workshops and success meetings. Then, if they're interested, they do not have to. Everything about our case management philosophy is opt-in. That's part of how we meet folks where they're at. And so if they do want to move forward, we have these part-time employment opportunities. They're showing up 20 hours a week. They have to clock in using a system. They have our program manager that they're reporting to. They are then managing other folks, and so they're building management-related skills that they can then add to their resume. And they're receiving hourly wages in order to do so. And so there's this pathway that they are following, and so we want to extend that pathway as long as possible so that they can truly be successful, because the idea is that once they've done this part-time employment for 6 to 12 months, they're ready for full-time employment, 40 hours a week, and we're helping them secure that employment. And it is in jobs that they want to really be in. So we're not saying you need to do X, Y, Z because of your experience. We're saying, okay, what are you interested in? Do you like being outside? Do you like being inside? Do you want to do customer service? Would you rather do health services? And then what we do is we use our employment specialists, our case managers, and we try and find opportunities that really best suit their skill set so that they can move on to a career. And so we're always acknowledging what their contributions are. At the success meeting, we're telling our STE participant employees, thank you for showing up. Thank you for supporting team members in this way and making sure that we're giving public recognition to folks, because compensation does make a difference, but it's also about building folks up, helping them really hard charge their self-confidence and see that not only am I doing a good job here, but I'm valued here and what I'm doing makes a difference. And so all of those things together are what we've seen help our folks be most successful in pursuing full-time employment. Oh, and open communication always. I just looked my notes, sorry. But one of the things that our case managers do incredibly well is building these trust-based relationships with our clients, our team members. And so we consider ourselves professional problem solvers. And so somebody might have a bad day and their backpack got stolen. They will call a case manager and they will say, I just lost all my stuff. Do you have XYZ at the office? And we will do everything we can to help them get what they need so that they can get through the night, the week, anything that might help them in that way. But our folks, our case managers are available, within business hours, but always. And so it's not about, you could walk in and you would have the same access as somebody that wasn't actively actively participating in our program. And so you can call, you can text, you can show up. The office is open. And so by maintaining that open communication with our folks, we try really hard to walk the walk and to make sure that our folks know that we do that on a regular basis.
We've talked a lot about how we implement people with lived experience into programs and, including their voices and things like that. But more specifically, how can organizations, for Jesse and Tim, how can organizations ensure that lived experience voices are not only heard, but have real influence in decision-making processes?
Yeah, a big thing that came up earlier that Jocelyn was saying that really stuck out for this question was in terms of having people, not only empowering people, but having their voices actually come to fruition, what they want to actually implement. I think a big part of it, from what I've seen, is kind of goes back to what we're talking about. Not only picking people, selecting people with lived experience who are like poster children for it, who have the perfect non-symptomatic voice or the most coherent. It's really about the lived experience in total. And I look at it from a mental health and substance use background, but in terms of like relapse and the fact that recovery, including housing, stable housing, is not linear, and the fact that if someone can share their story, while struggling, that's really empowering for other people, and because that's the most humanizing part. Because if you see someone, say for instance, with the analogy of substance use, if you see someone who has 30 years sober, and they're speaking to someone who has a month sober, it's a big gap. It's a big gap in understanding. But someone who's navigated the housing system in Monterey County, for example, and has been failed, and has been successful, and has they've been homeless, they've had housing, they're temporary, permanent, all these things. Their story is going to be a lot more powerful from my experience as a service provider. I've seen those kind of stories be more effective, and they're just more realistic in the long run. And but in terms of having more people on various different stages of recovery or stages of homelessness, I think having those multiple voices really ensures that their voices get heard. If it's one person, I've seen it happen. Basically, what I'm trying to say is there's still a hierarchy. Someone who's been in house for 20 years, they haven't been homeless in 20 years, they'll tend to, from my experience, get heard a little more than someone who was just homeless a month ago. And in order for them I think their opinions and their voices to be heard, it needs to be just like everyone else. There needs to be multiple voices, not just one, person with lived experience. That's one way. And the second thing I wanted to share was just that, for example, when we have our peer advisory council, the fact is that we take notes, for example, hard notes on those groups. Everyone gets sent it, and they're able to check those notes before they go anywhere. Because sometimes, even with someone sharing their voice, a staff member or a clinician might, reword it so it's a little more coherent, and it totally changes the message. And sometimes it waters down, and it stops being their voice. And so I think, we have to treat it like it was a clinician's voice, but also, we have to support them. And sometimes clients need support in wording it in a way that's easier to hear, but we don't want to change the message. And I think that's the biggest thing is don't treat it any different than a clinician's voice in that way.
So we have to give, the lived experience is to me, it's that's the most important piece of any organization, should be the most important piece of any organization when creating their rules, regulations, and policies, and just overall program in general. Not just to, we got to give lived experience people real decision-making authority, not just advisory roles. Involve them early, co-design, don't just consult. Pay them fairly and remove barriers to participation. Create safe, inclusive spaces where they can thrive. Build leadership skills and offer ongoing support. Track and show how their input is used. Leaderships must actively back and model respect for lived experience. Just for my situation, I felt purpose in my life by getting involved in this fight to end homelessness, and a lot of people that could be their purpose as well. It doesn't have to be mine, and that's the most important I think we could do is instill a little hope and love and show a little hope and love, for people. They've lost people have lost all hope, they don't care enough about themselves anymore, even, you know, so we have to show that. We have to bring love and care with us everywhere we go, you know, and just try to empower them and show them that they are cared about and that they are worth it, that they do have a purpose.
There's a lot of different ways that you can compensate folks in your programs to meet different needs, right? So at our old project, there was a massive landscaping need, and there wasn't enough in the maintenance budget to actually hire a full-time groundskeeper. So we employed 4 of our members on a super part-time basis to handle all of the groundskeeping or the porter duties that would have built into one full-time job description. If you have a stipend program through your organization, you can partner with the police department if they need support on groundskeeping around their department office. If you are a city council member who could use support with some basic data entry, there could be 6 to 10 hours available that you could work on an MOU with the service provider. And because it's a stipend payment, you're not held liable for a lot of the things that you would be if you hired a full-time employee with benefits. And so that gives someone a pathway to employment and also creates sustainable partnerships within the community and debunks the whole notion of othering that happens when we talk about people experiencing homelessness. When I worked with Soledad on the budget for our new ERF project, Megan and Beatrice, they're in the room right now, they knew about a person in the program and wanted to build it in the budget to make sure that that person would become employed through the grant funding. And the chief of police and the chief of fire also discussed this person as well, who is currently living in a motel. But this was part of the project design and a big part of the discourse before we even began our work. So you want to just think outside of your own organization as well. Look at the partnering agencies that you work with. See if they have needs that can be met. If you're next to a hotel that needs to fill a need somewhere, whether it's general maintenance, trash pickup, some sort of work that can be done, make it happen. Because those are, ways to sort of bridge the gap.
Tim, I feel like you guys have so efficiently answered all these questions and then some, and so we've kind of probably touched base on the last couple questions, but Tim, this one's for you. What strategies can help shift organizational culture to value lived experience as professional expertise?
Yeah, I'll just echo what I was really saying earlier about just, it has to start at the top, you know what I'm saying? It has to start at the top with leadership, modeling, and commitment, and then embedding lived experience into policies and structures, equal pay and career pathways, and just having like cultural humility and anti-bias training. I think a lot of it goes into training too. And I know and like Jocelyn was saying earlier, like highlight and celebrate lived experience success stories. You know what I mean? That's important to do. Build strong mentorship and peer support systems. I think that's probably the biggest thing that we can do is just develop this system of peer supports. Like I said, when people find purpose in their life, like I've been through a lot in my life, incarceration, homelessness, but everything came to a full circle when I realized that this was my purpose. Everything happened for a reason. It's because it instilled me with that wisdom that I can't get from a book, and that really gave me a purpose and drive in my life, and I'm sure it can in many other folks' lives as well. And and just implement like accountability measures for it as well. And
last question for all of you. Can you provide examples, which you already have a little, but examples of how your organization meets people where they are and why this is a priority?
So for us, we consider ourselves a low barrier program. So what that means is that somebody can show up at a success meeting with nothing, and all we need is their signature on our intake form, and we can provide them with services. They get to choose what services they receive. It is opt-in case management always. We're never going to tell somebody what they need to do or how they need to do it. We want them to meet us halfway, and so we ask them, we do a goals assessment, and we ask them, what are your goals, personal, professional, and otherwise? And then we make a plan with them, what feels achievable, what feels possible. And we work with them as they move forward through all of those goals. And so that is is a hugely core piece of what we do. We also, we're trauma informed. We recognize that every individual has a story. There's a reason why somebody is struggling with substance use disorder. There is a reason why they're not in communication with their family. And so we want to support everyone regardless of what their past is so that they can achieve their goals and move forward to self-sufficiency. And the final thing is we really believe that there is no one-size-fits-all solution here. Every person that is experiencing homelessness is an individual. They do have their own past. And so the services that we provide are individualized based on that person, what they need, what they want. And I think that is a very core piece to meeting somebody where they are, what is possible. That looks different for everyone. And we wouldn't want to discourage somebody from moving forward towards achieving their goals because we have set parameters around that are discouraging. And so yeah, low barrier program, individualized approach, trauma-informed, lots of empathy.
I think for interim, I think it's the whole piece is having the lived experience. Almost all of our, like I said, wellness navigators and community support workers have lived experience. So a lot of the time, a client or peer's first interaction is going to be with someone with lived experience. I think that's huge, and I think that really, that helps destigmatize it, and it helps build rapport. A lot of people, they don't want to deal with clinicians because they've had negative traumatic experiences before. And but I know in my program, specifically Success Over Stigma, there was one specific example that was really powerful that had a peer that was sharing their story. They were like the head person for this program, and they had a relapse in their housing, in their substance use, which consequence was put their housing at risk, and they were hospitalized. And while they were hospitalized, they were invited to speak at another panel, and this organization had gotten stipends to buy this client's books. They were a writer, and basically while they were in the hospital, this client found out that they were asked to speak and to share their story, and that became a big part of their recovery. They gave them something to look forward to right out of the hospital, gave them a reason to stay in their housing, to do these things, and everyone was so encouraging, and it's not, it wasn't stigmatized or punished or anything like that. And I think a big part of interim is that it's just like Tim was saying, it's not housing, it's not just housing first, it's not housing only either, it's the whole thing. And providing that sense of community is going to be I think that's what's most long lasting for all of our clients' success, is just having a system that perpetuates itself within recovery. And I think that's that, and it's the biggest part of that is sharing, having people who have lived experience be part of it, not just consuming services, but actually providing them as well.
Thanks, Jesse. I think Step Up tries to meet people where they're at through the exchange of language and how we listen. I think, and I probably can be annoying, some of my staff are here, I don't like it when we're working with members and we say sounds like after they say things. I don't like it when we do the active listening, what I hear you saying. So I don't like any of this prescriptive pathologizing of people. That's not something I'm interested in. So when we work with folks who may be expressing resistance or sharing things with us, we try to practice our conversations and role play them as if we were talking with our friends, and actually hearing what they're saying and not being safeguarded by the way that we preface our words. So that helps. I think a lot of the times homeless services sort of oscillate between being punitive and being safeguarded by rules in their programs and participation expectations, and permissive, where we bring handouts and we give you a lot of things, and we show up every week, and if we don't show up, you're mad at us, right? But the magic exists between those two spaces, and it's when we have a high expectation, but we match it with a high level of support. And we can do that in a lot of different ways, and one of those ways is having conversations about what people want to accomplish in their life, and then asking follow-up questions about how they're going to design their roadmap to do that. And we hold them accountable to what they say, and then develop discrepancies and create spaces for reflection when they don't get there. We don't discharge them from programs, and that's one way that we do it.
That was a great explanation. I love that. So I speak about this quite often. I don't know if many people know me, but I always speak about meeting people where they're at. And like I was preaching earlier, that it's to meet people where they're at, we have to like understand. We have to overstand, actually, not understand, but think first to overstand before to be understood, right? And really try to put ourselves in their shoes and just be genuine. They're just another person, just like you are, you know. And it's stigmatizing and stereotyping is oppressive when we put people in a box and we don't give them, like Jocelyn was saying, we got to give every individual their unique person, you know what I'm saying, their own unique story, you know what I'm saying, their own unique person. And we have to be appreciative of that fact, you know, and empowerment starts with trust, dignity, and respect for each other's unique journey, you know. So we have to trust that folks are capable of making their own decisions, right? So, like, we have to provide them with autonomy. This is the method that works best, proven, you know. Other people might not think that way, but this is the fact, you know what I'm saying? Not only does it provide them with the respect, but also it dignifies them and it just provides them more hope that, you know, we're trusting that this person is a person and has a brain and is smart enough to figure some stuff out, you know. But what we could do to meet people where they're at, like when we meet people where they're at, we don't have to, we try to understand where they're at, but we don't leave them there necessarily, right? We don't just leave them there. There's techniques that we use, and like Julius was saying, like there's motivational interviewing techniques. I think it's like the most important, one of the most important things, in learning how to empower people. But you can't. It's all about building relationships with people. Once you have that relationship established with the person, there's a lot you could do. There's a lot more realness you can have with that person, and I think that is like just such a crucial fact, is just being able to utilize that in street-based outreach. There's different ways you could utilize it, but you know, it's getting people to think about questions that they normally wouldn't think about. That's what the key concept of motivational interviewing is, to get them to think about things they normally wouldn't think about. And then, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely were you at? I'm not asking you this question for myself, it's so you could ask yourself that question. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the whole key of motivational interviewing. It's not for us to have the answers, it's for them to ask themselves. You know, so meet people where they're at. It's just really about like understanding where they're at. And that's why lived experience is so crucial, is because it's hard for anyone. I can't understand where anyone's at if I haven't really been there for similar situations. Thank you.
Hello. Well, my answer was actually answered with this last question. You know, having to work out in the field, I noticed that the hardest part is just helping someone feel like they're worthy of a position like this. And it's just like a back and forth, you know, because they come to work and then probably go out for the night and something might happen and they feel kind of back to square one. So that last question was very impactful for me, so thank you.
Any more questions? That's our panel discussion for today. Thank you all for joining us.